A place without law, only the powerful and the prey. The police here do not protect, they control. Those who obey live in peace. Those who resist get crushed. Tonight, they chose the wrong target. A black student on his way home was stopped, harassed, and shoved into a patrol car without explanation. No reason, no evidence, only badge-wearing thugs. They thought he'd be scared, thought he'd be silent. But the only call from the holding cell wasn't to a lawyer or his mother. It was to a Navy SEAL captain, a warrior with no mercy, a nightmare for the corrupt. And when a SEAL comes back to find his son detained, the predators will understand what it means to become the prey. Where are you watching from? Comment now and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories of justice, strength, and people who never bow down. Millbrook is not an easy place to live, at least not for people like Jordan Carter. Nestled between hills in the south, this small town used to be peaceful, but now it's the hunting ground for predators wearing police uniforms. No one can work or live without paying protection fees to the law enforcement. Those who dare oppose are labeled as resisting arrest, beaten, falsely accused, or mysteriously disappear. Black people, laborers, those who can't afford to pay or aren't scared enough, all become prey. In the heart of this injustice, Jordan Carter grew up like a fire that wouldn't die. At 17, Jordan is tall, lean, but tough, with the strong will his father, Captain Marcus Carter, instilled in him from an early age. Marcus Carter is no ordinary father. He's the leader of a Navy SEAL unit, a warrior who has completed countless covert missions, a man who understands the world doesn't operate on justice, but on power and determination, and he taught his son that. From a young age, Jordan was trained in discipline, endurance, and tactical thinking that not every kid has. He can run 5 miles every morning, defend himself with his bare hands, and knows when to strike and when to retreat. But Millbrook is not a battlefield for those with guns. It's a hunting ground for beasts disguised as men. His father always said, "If you have to fight, fight the right way, not with your fists, but with your mind. The strongest isn't the one who fights the best, but the one who always controls the game." Jordan doesn't kneel to fear, but he knows sometimes stepping back is the way forward. He tried to live quietly, but Millbrook wouldn't allow it. That day, it was dusk when Jordan walked home from school. The hip-hop music from his headphones played softly, but he always stayed alert to his surroundings, a habit his father had drilled into him. Suddenly, the police car's headlights flashed behind him. A white and green Dodge Charger from the Millbrook Police Department slowly pulled up beside him. James Blake, the notorious brutal and corrupt officer, stepped out first. 2 other officers followed, hands near their gun belts, eyes scanning Jordan as though they'd already marked him as prey. "Stop, right there, kid," Blake's deep, menacing voice rang out. Jordan took a deep breath, staying calm. "Is something wrong, officer?" Blake sneered. "I saw you walking around here acting suspicious." Jordan clenched his fists. "Suspicious? I'm just walking home from school." "Don't lie to me." Blake stepped forward, his face twisted with malice. "There have been some thefts around here, and I think I have the right to detain you." Jordan knew this dirty game. The cops here always found an excuse to arrest whoever they wanted, especially black people. "I haven't done anything wrong." "You're resisting arrest, aren't you?" Another officer slammed his baton into his palm. The air was taut like a bowstring. "I want to call my mom or my lawyer." "A mistake." Blake's face darkened, his smile vanishing. "Really, kid?" Bam! A heavy punch landed in Jordan's stomach. He doubled over, his breath sucked out of him like air being drained from a balloon. "You want to act tough with me, huh?" Jordan bent forward, struggling to stay conscious, But before he could regain his bearings, the two other officers yanked him upright, twisted his arms behind him, and locked them in cuffs. Blake leaned in close, whispering, "You've just made a big mistake." The cold click of the cuffs echoed. "You're being arrested for disturbing the peace and resisting arrest." A sharp shove sent Jordan crashing into the patrol car door. The door slammed shut. From inside the car, Jordan watched the streetlights of Millbrook pass by in the darkness, each light like a flicker of hope being smothered out. Jordan's breath was still shallow as he was pushed into the holding cell. The cold air of the small room bit into him, but the chill in Blake's gaze was even more terrifying. "You have one call." Jordan picked up the phone, dialing the familiar number without hesitation. After 3 rings, a deep, yet cold voice answered. "Jordan?" "Dad." He took a deep breath. "I need you right now." Thousands of miles away, Marcus Carter didn't say anything for a few long seconds, as if time itself had frozen. But when he spoke, his voice had completely changed. "Tell me exactly what's going on." Jordan started to explain. On the other end, Marcus listened intently, but each word from his son made him clench his fist. His eyes darkened, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Listen to me, son." His voice dropped, cold as ice. "Stay calm, okay? I'm handling this." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to teach these cops a lesson they'll never forget." The call ended. And that was the moment Millbrook made its biggest mistake. Marcus Carter froze as the call ended. He looked down at his hands, fingers clenched so tight that his knuckles turned pale. Over the years of executing top-secret missions, he had seen the most evil people on the planet, infamous gangs and terrorists who the whole world feared, but he had never felt the rage burning so fiercely as he did now. Because this time, it wasn't a mission. It was his family. His son, his flesh and blood. He sat in a dark room, the light from his control screen flashing continuously. Around him was a SEAL team, all preparing for a hostage rescue operation in a conflict-ridden region. But Marcus's mind was no longer on that far-off battlefield. His battlefield was Millbrook, where his son was being threatened by power-abusing individuals under the guise of law enforcement. Marcus took a deep breath, regaining his focus. A SEAL doesn't act on emotions, they act on strategy. He couldn't just go back to Millbrook and demand justice with his fists. Number. That was too simple, too crude, and it was too merciful for them. Number, he would destroy them from within. Marcus opened his military laptop, connecting to a high-security network. He wasn't just a skilled warrior with guns. He was also a master of information warfare. The first step was to identify the enemy. In just a few minutes, he had detailed profiles of James Blake and the entire Millbrook police force. James Blake, 38 years old, joined the police force at 22. He had risen to his current position not by talent, but through shady connections. Marcus went through the records, 8 complaints of police brutality, all dismissed. 3 missing black individuals after Blake interrogated them, no bodies ever found. Close ties with criminal organizations in Millbrook involved in extortion, smuggling, and money laundering. Marcus smiled coldly. These weren't just corrupt cops. They were a gang with badges and legal firearms. They thought power could protect them. But Marcus Carter would show them. They had picked the wrong person. Marcus didn't call the FBI directly. He called someone with more power than the FBI in situations like this. He dialed a series of encrypted numbers, and after a few rings, a deep voice answered. "Who's this?" I need a favor." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Marcus Carter. Long time no hear. What favor?" "There's a dirty police force running a small town. I need the FBI to look into them." "You want me to point the FBI at a small town?" "That's a bit much, Carter." "They just took my son." The silence on the other end lasted longer this time. "I'll arrange a call for tomorrow morning. Anything else?" Marcus looked at the screen where images of James Blake appeared. "I want them to be afraid." The next morning, at the Millbrook Police Department, James Blake arrived at the office in a particularly good mood. He was still relishing the satisfaction from the night before, when he saw Jordan Carter dragged into a cell like a puppy being punished. He didn't need a good reason to arrest kids like Jordan. He was the law in this town. He sat down, poured himself a cup of coffee and sipped it slowly, savoring the morning ritual. But as soon as he opened his computer, an email popped up. Sent from the U.S. Department of Justice. Subject: Urgent request regarding the arrest of citizen Jordan Carter. The FBI will investigate. Blake frowned. Before he could process what was happening, his desk phone rang. "Blake, speak." "James Blake, this is Agent David Monroe with the FBI. We need you to answer for the illegal detention of a citizen last night. Please provide a full report immediately." Blake felt like someone had poured ice water down his back. He put the coffee cup down, frustration rising in his chest. "I don't know what you're talking about, Agent. We did everything by the book." "Let's hope so, because if not, we'll be conducting a thorough investigation into the Millbrook Police Department." The call ended. Blake gritted his teeth, his hand clenching so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Damn it! What is this?" Another officer knocked on the door and stepped in. "Boss, something's come up. This morning, someone sent a list of your suspicious financial transactions to the local press." Blake felt his heart skip a beat. He snatched the file and looked down. Suspicious payments, unaccounted money from town gangs, everything was in there. Someone's hand had started reaching for him. Blake knew he was being hunted, but he didn't know who was lurking in the shadows. Meanwhile, at the police station, Jordan Carter was called out of the holding cell. An officer looked at him with disdain. "You're lucky, kid. Someone up top wants you out of here." Jordan said nothing, just stared at him. A look of defiance, unbroken. Walking out of the police station, Jordan saw a black Jeep parked at the corner. Marcus Carter stood there, arms crossed, his gaze as sharp as ice. No words were exchanged, only a father and son's eyes meeting, a silent vow made without words. Millbrook had declared war, and this time they would regret it. The atmosphere in the Jeep was thick with an unnamed silence. Marcus Carter sat behind the wheel, his gaze fixed straight ahead at the road, but his thoughts were focused entirely on his son sitting beside him. Jordan was quiet, his hands tightly gripping his knees, his eyes darkened by everything he had just endured. As the Jeep turned onto the familiar road leading home, Marcus spoke, his voice deep and certain. "What did you see at the police station?" Jordan turned to look at his father, furrowing his brow. "Corruption," he answered, his voice unwavering. "They aren't afraid of being exposed because they believe no one dares to challenge them. Everyone is scared, and those who aren't, they silence them." Marcus nodded slightly, a cold smile flickering across his stern face. "Then they've forgotten one thing." Jordan waited, his gaze fixed on his father's tough face. "In order to be a predator, they must ensure that no one is hunting them." This time, Marcus's voice became sharp, like the edge of a blade. "And now, they are the prey." Millbrook hadn't changed, at least not on the surface. The small streets were still quiet under the pale streetlights. The old shops still lit late into the night, and the people still lived in their false sense of peace. But Marcus saw what others didn't. At street corners, police cars were parked in strategic positions, not to protect, but to monitor. In front of small shops, there were subtle signs of covert terrorism, defaced signs, shattered windows, and threats hastily scribbled on walls. Marcus realized Millbrook wasn't just plagued by dirty cops, it was a system deeply entrenched in the roots of the town. Jordan saw it too. He looked out the window, his eyes darkening when he saw a small grocery store he used to frequent now closed, with a simple notice on the glass. Bankrupt, liquidating assets. They didn't pay for protection, Marcus said, as if reading his son's mind. Jordan clenched his fist. So, they did this to them. Marcus scoffed. They've done much worse. Over the next 2 days, Marcus and Jordan dug deeper into what was really happening in Millbrook. They met with small business owners, oppressed citizens, families with missing loved ones. Each person had a story that echoed the same. They were forced by the police to pay protection fees. If they refused, their shops would suffer accidents or be subjected to harsh inspections. If they continued to resist, the accidents wouldn't happen to their stores, but to them or their loved ones. But the worst part wasn't the businesses closing. Millbrook had a long list of people who had disappeared. A high school teacher vanished after attempting to sue the police department for wrongfully detaining students. A postal worker, who had claimed to have evidence of shady money dealings. A young reporter, who disappeared shortly after publishing an article about corruption in the town. And the most horrifying thing, no one in town dared to speak about them. Not because they didn't remember, but because they were afraid. At the Millbrook police station, James Blake was living on edge. He knew something was happening. The FBI wasn't paying attention to Millbrook for no reason. Someone had gotten involved. When he received word that Marcus Carter had returned to town, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A real fear. Marcus Carter wasn't like the people he used to threaten. He had dealt with all kinds of criminals, mobsters, drug dealers. But those people were just greedy. They only wanted money and power. Marcus Carter was something entirely different. He was a man who had seen death, who had lived through the harshest things on the battlefield, and most importantly, he couldn't be threatened. Blake gripped the cigarette between his fingers, then abruptly extinguished it in the ashtray. He couldn't let this continue. "That bastard wants trouble? Fine," he muttered. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he rarely used. After 3 rings, a deep voice answered. "What's up?" "I need to deal with someone." There was a brief silence on the other end, followed by a soft chuckle. "It's been a long time since you called me, Blake. Who is it?" "Marcus Carter." A long pause. Then the voice on the other end grew colder. "Are you sure? That guy's no ordinary citizen." "Yeah, I'm sure," Blake growled. "He's causing trouble, and I'm not letting him do it." "All right, but if we deal with him, you owe us big time." Blake smirked. "Go ahead. When he's gone, I'll handle the rest." The call ended. Blake slammed the phone down on the table, his eyes flashing with malice. He didn't know much about Marcus Carter, but one thing he knew for sure. Anyone could be cleaned up if the price was right. He had given the order to hunt, but what he didn't know was he was the one being hunted. Blake slammed the phone down on the table, his mind overflowing with frustration. He had never felt insecure in this town. Millbrook had always been under his control. Every opponent had been threatened, beaten, or disappeared. But this time, there was a sense of an uncontrollable danger hanging over him. The name Marcus Carter was no ordinary one. He had heard of the SEALs, those soldiers who had fought in missions the government didn't even dare acknowledge. They weren't like the usual rebels or petty thieves that he could handle with a few bullets or a staged accident. And what was even more terrifying was that Marcus hadn't yet acted openly. But Blake could already feel the heat. But Blake wasn't one to be cornered. He decided to strike first. Marcus Carter knew that to bring down an enemy, the first step was to isolate them. Blake wasn't just a dirty cop, he was a cog in a corrupt system deeply rooted in Millbrook. And to uproot a rotten tree, you had to strike straight at its roots. He opened the military-grade laptop, connecting to a secure communication channel. The FBI's security system couldn't easily access internal information from police departments, but Marcus had his own ways. On the screen, files began to appear, evidence of corruption, shady financial transactions, cover-ups of crimes, investigations that had been intentionally buried. Marcus typed a command, compressing all the data into an encrypted file. And with just one click, the political storm was about to descend on Millbrook. Jordan was no longer just a student observing from the sidelines. He had been thrust into this fight from the moment Blake punched him in the stomach and cuffed him like a criminal. But he wasn't a warrior like his father. He didn't have a gun, didn't have the lethal combat skills, but he had the technology and tactical thinking Marcus had taught him. And he knew what to do. With the small GoPro hidden in his jacket, Jordan began recording everything. The police officers walking into the bar controlled by the local mafia, laughing as if they were best friends. A group of officers deliberately issuing unreasonable fines to small businesses to force them to close. An arrest of an innocent man simply because he was too poor to bribe the cops. Each video was edited, time-stamped, and uploaded to an anonymous YouTube channel. Within 24 hours, the clips began to spread. The residents of Millbrook began to doubt. Those who had once been afraid, who had gritted their teeth and endured, started speaking out. Blake felt the pressure mounting on his shoulders. But he didn't realize that the pressure was just beginning. Blake couldn't let this continue. If he didn't act soon, his whole system would collapse. He called his 3 most loyal cops, the ones who wouldn't hesitate to shoot someone if ordered. "I want to send a message." Blake's voice was as cold as steel. "To Carter's house. And make sure you leave a trace." He didn't need to kill Marcus or Jordan. He just needed to make them understand that if they didn't leave Millbrook, the town would swallow them whole. The 3 cops, dressed in plain clothes, drove a black SUV to the outskirts where Marcus and Jordan lived. They waited until midnight when everything was silent. The SUV stopped in front of the house. One of them opened the trunk, pulling out 2 gasoline cans, while another prepared a Molotov cocktail. They planned to burn it all down. They didn't know that Marcus Carter had anticipated everything. Before returning to Millbrook, he had installed a military-grade security system around the house. Motion sensors, infrared cameras, and especially a warning system that no one could see with the naked eye. The moment they stepped out of the car, Marcus knew. He had been waiting. From the darkness, Marcus sprang like a nightmare. In just 3 seconds, the first 2 were pinned down and slammed to the ground. Their guns snapped, their knees driven down hard enough that they screamed in pain. The third man, holding the Molotov cocktail, hadn't even thrown it when Marcus grabbed his wrist, twisted it back, and shoved him into his chest, making him lose his balance and fall backward. The bottle slipped from his hand, rolling across the ground. Marcus looked down at them. 3 cops who thought they could threaten his family. "Next time," his voice was cold, as hard as steel, I won't be so merciful." He pulled out his phone and dialed a contact. "Jordan? Dad?" His voice immediately rang out, full of concern. "Turn on the camera, record everything." Jordan quickly activated the camera remotely, capturing the scene of the 3 Millbrook officers being caught by Marcus Carter like rats. This scene would spread online as soon as dawn broke. And when Blake saw it, he would understand. He had made the worst mistake of his life. He had poked the hornet's nest, and this time the hornets would not forgive him. Blake felt every vein in his body tighten with rage as he watched the video again. On the screen, the 3 police officers he had sent were being tossed around like useless puppets by Marcus Carter. The image of Marcus standing in the darkness, the porch light casting shadows on his cold face, made him look like a predator with its prey in its grasp. It sent a silent chill down Blake's spine. He threw the phone onto the table, stood up, and punched the wall hard. "God damn it! You're all useless!" The 2 officers in the room flinched, but dared not speak. No one was willing to provoke James Blake at this moment. Blake closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to regain his composure. He couldn't let his anger overwhelm him. He had dealt with plenty of trouble in this town, but no one had made him feel this stressed out. What was worse, he had no idea what Marcus was going to do next. A guy like Marcus never reacted in the usual ways. He opened his computer, scrolling through numerous emails and reports from his trusted officers. Strange things had begun happening. Some officers had started receiving anonymous messages warning them that the FBI is watching. Sensitive documents about the Millbrook police were leaking onto dark web forums. The police headquarters had received a mysterious package containing an old photo of Blake, one where he was with members of a criminal gang he had once worked with. Blake clenched his fists. It's him. He's the one pulling the strings on this. But how could Marcus have gotten these documents? He turned to Officer Walker, one of his most loyal men. "Is there anyone in our force who's betraying us?" Walker swallowed. "There's no proof, but I've heard some are starting to panic. A few younger officers seem to be cracking under the pressure." Blake nodded slowly. "Good. I want a list of everyone showing signs of doubt. Anyone who looks like they're about to run. Anyone asking too many questions. Anyone who's no longer loyal. Everyone." He knew he needed to cleanse his own ranks before his entire system collapsed from within, but he didn't know that Marcus was setting him up for a game he couldn't win. In the darkness, fear was the strongest enemy. Marcus knew that a corrupt organization didn't fall with a single punch. It crumbled from within when those in the system began to doubt each other, to flee in fear. He started manipulating their minds, making them fight each other before he made his move. Step 1. Create the illusion of a powerful force. Watching Marcus sent anonymous emails to each officer, filled with details only someone inside the system would know. "The FBI has opened an investigation. We have a list of everyone involved. Run while you still can. Blake can't protect you. The higher-ups have started turning their backs on him. I know what you did on July 15th last year. The FBI knows too." No one knew who was sending these messages, but they started creating panic. Step 2. Make them doubt each other. Marcus sent a message directly to Blake with a chilling tone. "One of your team is working with me." He couldn't ignore that. No one dared admit they were betraying him, but from that moment Blake began to suspect even his closest allies. He started checking every officer, every piece of paperwork, every shift schedule. He ordered surveillance on those showing signs of panic, but this only caused the entire police force to begin to fear. Step 3. Break them. One by one. Within a week, strange things began to happen. 3 officers suddenly resigned, leaving town in the middle of the night without warning. Another disappeared after being caught gathering illegal documents from the office. One of Blake's loyal officers committed suicide in his car, leaving behind a haunting suicide note. Millbrook began to fall apart from the inside. In his office, Blake looked at the list of officers who had left. They no longer trusted him. For the first time, he felt his power slipping away. Marcus Carter didn't need a gun or direct confrontation. He simply created fear and let it do the rest. But Blake wasn't giving up yet. He pulled out his phone and called a special number, someone he hated to call even more than he hated Marcus. "I need help." The voice on the other end of the line was slow, dangerous. "Did you really go to war with Marcus Carter?" Blake gritted his teeth. "I don't care who he is, I just need him gone." There was a quiet laugh on the other end. "Fine, but once we step in, there's no turning back." Blake stared out the window, his expression darkening. No need to turn back, just do it. The call ended. Blake put the phone down and sighed. There was no turning back now. And tonight, the real monster would finally show itself. Blake set the phone down, his breath heavy. He had never liked having to ask this man for help, but he had no other choice. For years, Millbrook had been under the control of a hidden force, not the police, but a mafia operating in the shadows. They didn't just deal in smuggling and money laundering, they controlled the government, pulling strings with people like Blake to protect their operations. As his power began to crumble, Blake knew there was only one person who could help him turn things around: Thomas Lynch. Lynch was no ordinary thug. He wasn't just a crime boss. He was a businessman, a politician, a master manipulator who could control everything without ever getting his hands dirty. Blake drove to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Millbrook. This wasn't the first time he'd met Lynch, but each time left him more tense than the last. In the dim light, Lynch sat in the middle of the large room, surrounded by his men in black suits, guns holstered at their hips. Contrary to the ruthless appearance of those around him, Lynch wore a designer suit, his face sharp and without a wrinkle, his eyes cold, eyes that had long been accustomed to power. Blake tried to remain calm, but Lynch saw through the fear in his eyes the moment he stepped inside. "James Blake," Lynch smirked, pouring himself a glass of whiskey, not offering one to Blake. "Been a long time since you needed me. I thought you were handling things in Millbrook just fine." Blake swallowed hard. "There's a problem." Lynch tilted his head, signaling Blake to continue. "A new guy in town. Marcus Carter." Lynch narrowed his eyes when he heard the name. Blake saw a flicker of recognition pass through Lynch's gaze, as if he had heard that name before. "And what's he doing to cause you trouble?" Lynch picked up his glass, took a sip, his voice unchanged. Blake tried to steady his tone. "He's a former Special Forces guy. He's brought the FBI into this. He's strangling Millbrook's police from the inside." Lynch set his glass down with a chilling clink. "The FBI?" Blake nodded. "Anonymous messages, leaked documents, officers going AWOL, it all leads back to him. And I need him gone." Lynch was silent for a few seconds, his sharp gaze scanning Blake. "You're not telling me everything." Blake paused for a moment. Lynch leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table, his voice lower, each word like a knife. "If he's just a former Special Forces guy, you could have killed him by now. But you haven't. You tried to threaten him, and he didn't back down. You sent 3 men to wreck his house, and he dealt with them in seconds." Lynch stared deep into Blake's eyes. I've dealt with all kinds of people in my life, Blake. Guys like you, greedy, cowardly, but knowing when to be afraid. But guys like him. Lynch let out a low chuckle, his eyes gleaming with dangerous amusement. Guys like Marcus Carter are the real problem. Blake felt a genuine fear rise inside him. If even Lynch was worried, then he was up against something he couldn't control. He had to make Lynch understand that Marcus wasn't invincible. "I don't need you to take him down," Blake growled. "I just need him distracted long enough for me to take back control." Lynch leaned back in his chair, thinking for a moment. Then he looked at Blake, his gaze calculating. "If I help you, what do I get?" Blake had anticipated this. He took a deep breath before answering. "I'll make sure all your operations in Millbrook are protected. The police won't touch you anymore." Lynch smiled faintly. "You're not getting it, Blake. I don't need the police to protect me. I need total control." Blake squinted. "What do you mean?" Lynch tilted his head, looking at him as though he were a foolish pawn on a chessboard. "I want the whole town. Every inch of it. You've lost control, and if I have to step in to fix your mistakes, then I'll be the one making the rules from here on out." Blake felt a surge of anger rise, but he couldn't protest. He needed Lynch, and he had no other choice. After a tense moment of silence, Blake nodded. "Fine." Lynch smiled in satisfaction. "Good. You'll have my people. But remember this, Blake." He lifted his whiskey glass, swirling it lightly in his hand. "I don't accept failure." He took a sip, not even sparing Blake another glance. Blake understood. He had sold Millbrook to the devil, but at least Marcus Carter wouldn't have time to strike back. In just one night, Millbrook changed. Unmarked SUVs appeared on the streets, shadowing every move Marcus and Jordan made. The bars and underground casinos, once controlled by the police, were now in the hands of the mafia. A few officers loyal to Blake were mysteriously eliminated, as a warning. Marcus could feel the air had shifted, the darkness had deepened, and the enemy had grown far more dangerous. But this wasn't the first time he had faced a battle in the shadows. Jordan looked at his father, his voice low but resolute. "They're bringing in reinforcements." Marcus smiled, a smile devoid of fear. Then the real fight is just beginning. Millbrook still maintained its deceptive silence as night fell, but in the shadows the hunters had begun to move. Blake sat in his office, hands clenched tightly on the desk as he stared at the message from Lynch. A brief but commanding line. "They've arrived. End him tonight." He knew Lynch didn't send ordinary people. These weren't street thugs or corrupt cops easily bribed. These were professional assassins, people who had worked in the shadows for the government, participating in missions the world would never know about. They left no trace, made no mistakes, and most importantly, never failed. They had been watching Marcus for days, studying his every habit, his daily routes, his methods of entering his home. Tonight, they would finish the job swiftly and silently, like predators patiently waiting for their prey to make a mistake. But what they didn't know was that Marcus was watching them too. He had known for 2 days that someone was following him. Quiet footsteps, yet with a pattern. Cars parked a distance away that never turned off their engines immediately. Eyes watching as he passed a street corner. They weren't as skilled as they thought, and certainly not as skilled as a SEAL commander who had been through the darkest operations the military had ever known. He had let them think he hadn't noticed, let them believe they had the upper hand. Now it was time to hunt the hunters. The first one was hiding behind an old brick wall next to an abandoned building. His eyes fixed on the scope, targeting Marcus. He switched to night vision, checking in with his teammates. Everyone still in position, waiting for the signal. But just as he prepared to signal, something flashed behind him. Before he could react, an arm tightened around his neck. In 3 seconds, the carotid artery was fully blocked. Oxygen could no longer reach his brain, and darkness overtook him before he even understood what had happened. The second one, not far off, also held his position, checking his watch, waiting for the signal. When no response came from his team, he muttered a curse and tried contacting them through his earpiece. Silence. He began to sense something was wrong, trying to peer through the scope to check his surroundings, but in the dense night there was nothing but shadows. The tension spread through his every nerve. He lifted his rifle, turned his head to check behind him, and that was his last mistake. Marcus lunged like a ghost, his hand wrapping around the assassin's neck, tightening before he could scream. The assassin's body jerked slightly, then softened in Marcus's grip before collapsing onto the cold ground. The last two started to sense something was wrong. One of them tried to retreat, but as he turned to run toward the car, his leg was suddenly yanked backward. Before he could process what happened, his body was thrown to the ground, his head smashing into the concrete, a sharp pain radiating through his skull before he slipped into unconsciousness. The final assassin held his position, sweat running down his spine, his fingers tightening around his weapon. He knew he had walked into a trap. His teammates had disappeared without a sound, no gunfire, no trace, only him and the eerie silence. He tried to steady his breathing, scanning every dark corner for any sign of the enemy, but there was nothing but the night. He heard the wind. Then a low voice spoke right behind him. "You shouldn't have taken this job." His whole body tensed, but before he could turn around, a powerful blow to his temple sent his world into darkness. When he woke up, his first awareness was the cold ground beneath his back, followed by the numbness spreading through his body. His wrists were tightly bound, along with his 3 teammates, sprawled across the dusty floor of an abandoned warehouse. In the darkness, a dagger was embedded in the concrete right in front of him, with a small piece of paper wedged under the blade, written in a decisive hand. "You're the prey. I'm the hunter." When news of this failure reached Lynch, he sat in silence for a long time, his cold eyes staring down at the photo of the 4 assassins easily taken out. This was no ordinary battle. It was a confrontation with someone not of this world, a monster who had survived the most brutal fights, a warrior who knew how to make the enemy panic before they even drew their guns. Blake felt every breath become heavier as he realized the massive mistake he had made. He wasn't facing a mere rebel anymore. He was facing a man trained to hunt people like him. Throughout his career, he had threatened, tortured, and killed to control Millbrook. But this time, for the first time in his life, he realized a terrifying truth. He was no longer the hunter. He was the prey. Blake stayed up all night, his vacant gaze fixed on the computer screen in his office. The reports in front of him felt like death sentences. Not for Marcus Carter, but for himself and the entire corrupt system he had built over the years. The words on the screen sliced through his mind like sharp knives. A massive leak of classified information had gone public, revealing secrets that only those at the very top of the corrupt system knew. Disappearances labeled as accidents, falsified reports, businesses crushed to pay protection money, bribes funneled into his and his senior officers' accounts. Everything had been exposed to the light. He knew this wasn't some random leak. This was a targeted attack, and the one behind it was Marcus Carter. The information leak wasn't an accident. It was a perfectly planned campaign. While Marcus carried out a psychological operation to tear down the Millbrook Police Department from the inside, he knew he needed something stronger to end the game. A battle couldn't rely solely on darkness. It needed light. It needed a burst of justice. It needed the fury of the public. And for that, he needed someone capable of taking down Millbrook's information system without leaving a trace. He called someone he trusted, Miles Cypher Dawson, an outstanding hacker who had once worked for the military before leaving due to his refusal to be controlled by the government. The call was made over a secure channel, and when Miles picked up, his voice had a hint of curiosity. "Marcus Carter. Haven't heard from you in a while. I guess you're not calling to ask how I'm doing, are you?" Marcus smiled. "I have a job for you. A corrupt police system, covered-up murders, rampant corruption, and I need the whole truth brought to light." Miles chuckled softly. "Interesting, but I need raw data. What I can hack remotely isn't much unless you have something from the inside." Marcus had prepared for this. He sent an encrypted file that he and Jordan had gathered over time. Evidence, secret videos, audio recordings of Blake and his underlings' internal conversations. Less than an hour later, Miles called back. "Do you know what this is going to do? If released, the whole town will explode." "Exactly. I want them with no way out." "All right, but I'm not just posting it online. I'll send it straight to law enforcement agencies, major media organizations, and if needed, I'll make the whole country know about Millbrook." Marcus's voice grew serious. "Go ahead." The next morning, Millbrook woke up to a nightmare for those in power. News outlets were flooded with shocking headlines. Millbrook Police Department's corruption exposed. Strange disappearances in the town. Is the government involved? Leaked data shows the town is controlled by a disguised criminal organization. On social media platforms, videos from Jordan capturing police harassment were spreading like wildfire. People began speaking out. Victims who had been oppressed no longer fearful. Before, no one dared to stand up against this system. But once the truth was exposed, fear began to give way to rage. Blake clenched his fists, staring at his phone as notifications from major news outlets poured in. He knew this was spiraling out of control. The office door slammed open, and a panicked officer rushed in. "Boss, someone from the FBI is calling. They want to meet immediately." Blake felt a chill run down his spine. Not just the FBI, but the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, and even human rights organizations had started speaking out. He had never felt such pressure. Lynch had been right. Marcus Carter wasn't just a problem. He was a storm, sweeping everything in its path. In another office within the Millbrook government, an emergency meeting was called. The mayor, the police chief, and the heads of the corrupt system were all present, their faces filled with visible tension. Mayor Thomas Gregory slammed his hand on the table, his voice laced with worry. "We need to control public opinion immediately. If the FBI gets involved, we're done for." Police Chief Anderson, Blake's direct superior in the system, gritted his teeth. "We still have a chance. If we can stop the FBI before they enter the town." But before he could finish, the door to the meeting room opened. A pale-faced secretary entered, holding an official letter, his voice trembling. "We don't have time. The FBI just sent a notice." He paused, as if afraid to read on. The mayor growled, "Say it now." "They're officially investigating the Millbrook Police Department and the entire local government, starting tomorrow morning." The atmosphere in the room thickened. Everyone in it knew that the battle had shifted. This was no longer an underground war between a former Special Forces operative and a group of corrupt officials. This was an open battle between the justice system and those who had manipulated the town in the shadows for years. Elsewhere in the town, Marcus stood in front of his house, watching Jordan sit at a computer, tracking the reactions on social media. Jordan turned around, his eyes full of confidence, his voice full of excitement. "Dad, do you see? We did it. We woke up the whole town." Marcus nodded, but his expression remained cautious. "We've only just sparked the war, son. They still have power, still have plenty to protect. And when those in power are cornered—" He looked out into the night, his voice dropping low. "They'll do anything to keep their power." Jordan fell silent, but he understood what his father meant. The war had just begun. The faint light of the morning did little to ease the suffocating atmosphere that enveloped Millbrook. On the news, sensational headlines continued to appear, exposing the corruption that had taken root deep within every corner of the town. The public was outraged, and investigators from the FBI and the Department of Justice had begun gathering evidence. But the real masterminds behind the town's darkness had realized their time was running out. Blake and Lynch had no choice but to flee. Blake sat in a darkened office, the room filled only with the sound of his constantly vibrating phone. He refused to answer. He knew the voices on the other end were the remaining loyal officers, desperately asking if there was any way out of the storm. But even he didn't know what to do next. Lynch, in contrast to Blake, wasn't sitting idly. He had spent too long in the underground world to know that when a ship is sinking, those who don't jump off will go down with it. He wasn't about to drown. The escape plan was in place. Lynch had arranged a way out. A fleet of unmarked small trucks had been parked on the outskirts, waiting. His most loyal henchmen had cleared every trace, erasing anything that could link him to the crimes he had committed. Anonymous bank accounts had been set up, ready to move him to a place where the law couldn't touch him. Blake wasn't as lucky. He had never considered running. In his mind, Millbrook was his domain, a place where he could do anything without anyone being able to stop him. But now, with the FBI on his trail and the very officers who once fought by his side beginning to turn on him, he realized he had lost everything. Reluctantly, he agreed with Lynch that tonight they had to leave the town, before there was no other way out. But there was one thing they didn't know. Marcus and Jordan had been waiting for this very moment. When the snakes had nowhere left to hide, that's when it was easiest to crush their heads. The trap was set. Marcus wasn't just relying on his instincts, but also on information. Miles Cypher Dawson had hacked into the communication system of Lynch's men, discovering the escape route they were using. One of the most important stops was a small harbor on the outskirts, where they would board a private boat and disappear from the U.S. Marcus wasn't going to let that happen. He didn't notify the FBI. He didn't call the police. This wasn't a legal arrest, nor was it a police-style chase. This was a real hunt. Blake knew he was being followed. He sat in the car, looking through the rearview mirror, feeling as though someone was watching his every move. He ordered the convoy to speed up, but the fear never left him. Then everything shattered. A loud explosion rang out in front of them. A pickup truck shot out from the side of the road, blocking their escape. The screech of tires, panic-stricken henchmen drawing their guns, but before they could react, darkness poured in. Marcus appeared like a nightmare. He moved faster, harder, and more dangerous than anything they had ever faced. In less than a minute, 4 henchmen were down. Jordan, though not trained like his father, still knew how to take advantage of the situation. He snuck around the side of the truck, smashing the window, causing Blake to jump in panic. But Marcus didn't give him a chance to react. He yanked the car door open, dragged Blake out, and slammed him onto the cold ground. Blake screamed in panic, trying to struggle, but in the blink of an eye, a handgun was pressed to his temple. He gasped for breath, sweat pouring from him. He had threatened, beaten, and ordered people to be killed without hesitation, but he had never felt as close to death as he did now. Marcus leaned down, his face emotionless, but his eyes seemed to pierce into Blake's decaying soul. "You think this is hell?" Blake trembled, not daring to take a deep breath. "You haven't seen hell yet." Meanwhile, Lynch was running. He wasn't as foolish as Blake. He knew when the tables had turned, there was no place for people like him anymore. He fled into the shadows, looking for a way out, but he had forgotten one crucial thing. Marcus Carter always knew where his prey would go before it even realized itself. Lynch rushed toward another vehicle, drew his gun, but as he opened the car door, a blow as powerful as lightning struck his jaw, sending him stumbling backward. Jordan stood there, gripping a pair of nunchucks that he had hidden in his jacket. He panted, looking at Lynch with the eyes of someone who was no longer the shy boy he once was. Lynch tried to sit up, but Marcus appeared behind him, stomping on his back, pinning him to the ground. "You think you can run?" Lynch gritted his teeth, trying to struggle, but Marcus's strength was something that couldn't be fought against. "You won't win," Lynch snarled, but there was no confidence in his voice anymore, only desperation. Marcus tightened his grip, making Lynch feel the weight of his defeat. "I don't need to win. I just need you to never hurt anyone again." By the time the FBI arrived, they were lying motionless on the ground. Blake and Lynch were tightly bound, their mouths gagged, eyes wide with terror. An agent stepped down, surveying the scene before turning to Marcus, admiration in his gaze. "We got an anonymous tip about their hideout, but I didn't expect to be so late." Marcus didn't answer. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the two men he had been hunting for so long. Blake hissed through clenched teeth, "Who are you?" Marcus leaned down, his eyes cold as steel. "I'm the one you never should have touched." Watching the two men who had manipulated Millbrook being taken away by the FBI, Jordan turned to his father, his voice steadier than ever. "You were right, Dad. We didn't need to kill them." Marcus gave a faint smile. "No, son, but we can make them wish they had never existed." The sky over Millbrook was a dull gray. A storm was imminent, but the tension in the town was thicker than any storm could bring. Sheriff Anderson, Mayor Thomas Gregory, and a slew of high-ranking officials were racing against time, scrambling to hold things together before the entire system collapsed beneath them. From the mayor's office window, Gregory looked down at the streets where people had begun to gather in small groups, murmuring excitedly about the revelations that had been exposed. News stories continued to spread on national media, and the data leaked by hacker Miles Dawson had ignited public outrage. Yet, the real death of this system didn't come from the public outcry. It came from those who had once benefited from it. The officers loyal to Anderson were now beginning to panic. Some had fled the town overnight, while others scrambled to destroy evidence. But they all knew that when the FBI arrived, no one would escape. The purge had begun. The next morning, as the sun crept over the horizon, the FBI convoy appeared in the center of Millbrook. The task force, along with federal agents, spread out across the town, raiding the police headquarters, City Hall, and the businesses that had served as covers for Lynch's criminal organization. Sheriff Anderson was desperately trying to delete files on the system when the door to his office was kicked open. 3 agents stormed in, guns aimed at him, their voices loud and commanding. "Hands up, Anderson. You're under arrest for corruption, aiding criminals and obstructing justice." Anderson froze, his eyes hollow as he realized there was no way out. He didn't have time to beg or negotiate. In a matter of seconds, his hands were cuffed, and he was pushed out of the office he had once controlled with fists and firearms. Other officers, those who had once stood behind him, watched the scene in terror. No one dared to react. They all knew the system had collapsed. At City Hall, the situation was even more chaotic. Mayor Thomas Gregory was attempting to erase offshore bank accounts, but he was too slow. An FBI agent barged in, pulling him from his chair and slamming him onto the desk before he could say a word. "Thomas Gregory, you're under arrest for abuse of power, embezzlement, and protection of criminals." He struggled, but the handcuffs tightened around his wrists. Everything he had built, all the wealth, power, and hidden secrets, now meant nothing. The news spread like wildfire, burning away the last remnants of the corrupt system. Businessmen who had once been forced to pay protection money now stepped forward confidently to testify. Families who had lost loved ones in mysterious disappearances were finally given a voice. Officials were dragged into the light one by one, from the lowest-ranking officers to those who had run the entire system. The FBI seized all illicit assets, freezing millions of dollars in secret accounts. The lavish homes of corrupt officials were searched, and hidden records were uncovered. Millbrook was no longer the same. At the police headquarters, young officer Ryan Parker watched it all with a sharp gaze. He said nothing as Anderson was led away, but when other officers looked at him, they understood that from now on, things would be different. A middle-aged officer who had once sided with Anderson nervously asked, "What's going to happen to Millbrook's police department?" Ryan looked him in the eye, his voice more resolute than ever. "We'll rebuild from scratch. No more dirty cops, no more fear." No one protested. They knew that from this moment on, Millbrook would no longer be a place for those who manipulated power. At a small cafe in the town center, Marcus Carter sat across from his son, Jordan. They quietly observed the crowd gathering outside City Hall. Jordan saw the bright eyes of the townspeople, the ones who had once bowed their heads in submission, but now stood tall, heads held high. He turned to his father, his voice still filled with emotion. "We did it, Dad." Marcus looked at him, his gaze gentle but wary. "No, son, we've only destroyed those who ran this system. But people like them will always exist. The system will only truly change when people like you make sure it never returns." Jordan understood his father's words. Justice wasn't just about arresting a few bad people and calling it a day. Justice had to be maintained, and he was ready to ensure it would never be forgotten. Meanwhile, in a secluded room at the Federal Detention Center, an interrogation was underway. The FBI had arrested Blake, Lynch, Anderson, and Gregory, but one final piece of the puzzle remained undisclosed. The lead investigator, Agent Sarah Matthews, sat across from Lynch, her gaze cold. "We have all the evidence on Millbrook, but we know you're not the one at the top." Lynch smirked, though his eyes flickered with fear. "If you think I'm going to say anything, you don't understand this world." Agent Matthews leaned forward, gently placing a stack of documents on the table. Documents about a larger organization, a criminal network that stretched beyond Millbrook, reaching into other states. "How long has this organization been in power, Lynch? Who's really behind it all?" Lynch fell silent, but for the first time in his life, he knew he couldn't run anymore. He had one choice left: cooperate or die in the darkness. Back in Millbrook, the sun shone down on a town that had changed. The people began a new day, no longer fearing that the police would come knocking with unreasonable demands. Small businesses reopened, no longer haunted by protection fees. Millbrook was no longer a town for predators. It had become a town for people ready to stand up for justice. Jordan clenched his fist, feeling a new sense of faith swelling inside him. This battle was over, but other battles, in other towns, were still waiting, and both father and son knew they wouldn't stop here. The sky in Millbrook was clearer than ever. Not because of the weather, but because the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of fear had vanished. For the first time in years, the people could walk down the streets without looking over their shoulders, no longer having to bow their heads to those who wielded power through violence. But even though the town had changed on the surface, Jordan's fight was just beginning. He was no longer just an ordinary high school student. What Jordan had done over the past months, secretly recording police brutality, helping expose a corrupt system, fighting alongside his father to take down the bad guys, had made him a name known across the country. The press hailed him as the young hero of Millbrook, but he didn't like that title. He wasn't a hero. He was just someone who refused to stay silent. The wave of change was spreading fast. Other small towns across America, once manipulated by dirty police forces, began to speak out. Young people like Jordan, students and activists who would not accept injustice, rose up in their own ways. They organized forums, used social media to expose the truth, and shared the evidence of corruption they had gathered. What had happened in Millbrook had become a symbol, a catalyst for shifting the way communities viewed justice and power. Jordan realized he had a responsibility to this movement. He was no longer someone standing in the shadows, filming and sending videos for others to act in his place. Now, he stepped up, speaking with his own voice. He participated in community discussions, visiting neighborhoods to talk to families who had endured oppression. He held conversations with fellow students, encouraging them to understand their rights and teaching them that they didn't have to accept injustice. His speeches weren't the flowery words of a politician or a seasoned activist. They were simple, strong, and honest. He stood before hundreds, but his words resonated as though he were speaking to each individual personally. "I'm not a hero. I'm not a warrior like my dad. I'm just a kid who doesn't want to live in fear. I'm just someone who dared to say, 'Enough.' Injustice doesn't disappear if we turn our backs on it. We have to face it, expose it, and never let it return." The more people heard him, the more they realized they could do it too. They didn't need to be a SEAL operative. They didn't need to be a genius hacker. They didn't need connections in the FBI. They only needed one thing: the courage to speak out. Not everyone liked the change. As Jordan became a symbol, there were those who hated him, those who had benefited from the old system. Businessmen who relied on corrupt cops to crush competitors, politicians protected by the mafia, didn't want to see a 17-year-old kid turning everything upside down. Threats began to surface. "You think you can change the world? You'd better watch yourself, or else." But Jordan wasn't deterred. He had been through enough to know that fear only made the bad guys stronger. Once again, he didn't back down. His father, Marcus, couldn't have been prouder. He had trained the best soldiers, led the most dangerous missions, but he had never seen a warrior more formidable than his own son. Not because Jordan knew how to fight, not because he could use weapons or set traps like a SEAL operative, but because he had the strength of someone who dared challenge the system, someone who stood firm when the whole world wanted him to fall. One evening, as the two of them sat on the porch steps at home, Marcus quietly looked at his son and spoke in a deep, warm voice. "You know, I used to think the only way to change the world was by fighting." Jordan turned to look at him. "But you've shown me that there's another way." Jordan smiled softly, but his eyes still held the same determination as the first day he was pulled into the police car as the first day he realized that justice didn't exist naturally. It had to be fought for. "I didn't just show you," he said, his gaze focused on the town, where the lights reflected on streets that now belonged to the people, no longer ruled by fear. "We've only just begun." And both of them knew that, while Millbrook had changed, there were many other towns that still needed to be awakened. Millbrook was no longer a town of hunters. The ghosts of corruption had been swept away, but the emptiness they left behind couldn't be filled with mere anger or the joy of victory. A new system had to be built, a system no longer based on fear, but on the trust of the people. But change doesn't come overnight. The abandoned buildings that once housed the corrupt police force and the mafia now stood empty, reminding the town of old wounds. The people were still hesitant to enter the police station because for many years it was not a place of safety, but a place of power abuse. Millbrook had been freed from the darkness, but true light would only come when the people believed they could walk without fear. The new police force was built. No room for those who had been involved in corruption. Not a single officer from Anderson's time was allowed to retain their position. New names, new faces, people who understood that their duty was not to control the town, but to protect it. The one entrusted with leading the new force was none other than Ryan Parker, the young officer who had dared to defy the system, even when it meant he could lose everything. The sheriff's appointment ceremony was simple. No parades, no fireworks, no long-winded speeches, just people who truly wanted to change this town, standing together to start a new chapter. Ryan stepped up to the podium, his hand on the Constitution, his voice strong yet tinged with a slight tension. Not because he was afraid, but because he understood the responsibility he was about to take on. "I, Ryan Parker, do solemnly swear to protect and serve the people of Millbrook with honor, integrity, and justice." The crowd below was silent, but in their eyes, for the first time in years, there was belief. Marcus stood at the back, observing that moment. He wasn't one for formal ceremonies, but there was something in Ryan's eyes that made him believe that this time things would be different. He remembered the conversation with Ryan after the official investigation ended, when the FBI began to pull out and hand control of the town back to the deserving people. Ryan had sat across from Marcus in a small cafe, holding a cup of coffee but not drinking it, his eyes full of contemplation. "I'm not sure I can do this," he admitted. Marcus raised an eyebrow, took a sip of his coffee, then spoke. "Are you not sure you can do this, or are you afraid you'll fail?" Ryan stayed silent for a moment, then sighed. "I've seen how this system works. I've seen how those before me controlled this town. I don't want to become one of them." Marcus set his coffee cup down, locking eyes with Ryan. "That's exactly why you're the right person for this job. Justice doesn't need people who think they're perfect. Justice needs those who understand the cost of power and are willing to do the right thing even when no one is looking." Ryan looked up at Marcus, and in that moment, he understood that this wasn't a choice, it was a responsibility. And that's why he stood there today with a shiny new badge on his chest, a symbol no longer stained by rot, but a promise. The changes began with the smallest things. New policies were introduced. Every officer must wear a body cam that operates 24/7. No records could be kept secret from the public. A civilian oversight board was established, where people could voice their opinions, report misconduct, and have a say in police oversight. Gone were the patrols with threatening stares. Gone were the unjust arrests. Gone were the beatings simply because someone was poor, or because they had a different skin color. Jordan watched all of this unfold, knowing this was what he had fought for. He saw children going to school without worrying about harassment from corrupt officers. He saw local businesses opening without the haunting threat of protection fees. He saw Millbrook, for the first time in his life, truly being a town he was proud to call home. But he also knew that justice was never permanent. He had seen how strong this system once was, seen how far people were willing to go to hold on to power. If he turned away, if people like Ryan grew complacent, if the community didn't continue to stand up for justice, then everything they had fought for could be taken away at any moment. And so, he didn't stop. One day, after Ryan's appointment ceremony, Jordan appeared on a national television show. The host introduced him with a warm smile. Today, we have a special guest, Jordan Carter, who played a key role in exposing corruption in Millbrook, a 17-year-old, but already someone who changed an entire town. Jordan, do you have anything you'd like to share with the young people watching this show? Jordan took a deep breath, then looked directly at the camera. Millbrook wasn't the first town to have corruption, and it won't be the last. I'm just an ordinary student. I'm not a hero, not a special agent, not a politician, but I chose not to remain silent. If there's one thing I want people to understand, it's this. Justice doesn't happen on its own. Justice has to be fought for, and most importantly, it has to be protected. If I can do it, then anyone can. The studio was silent for a few seconds. Then applause erupted, not because of his fame, but because they understood that Jordan's story was not just his own. It was the story of people who dared to stand up against evil, who dared to say enough, and who dared to demand justice. Millbrook had been reborn, but Jordan's fight was not over. It had only just begun. The mysterious call. Marcus received the call while sitting at home, in the living room, looking out at the street in front of his house, where Jordan was laughing and talking with his friends. This scene had once been a distant dream, a town where his son could grow up without living in fear. But that dream couldn't last if people like Lynch still existed elsewhere. He picked up the phone, answering a call from an unknown number. "Carter, this is Agent Matthews." He had heard of Matthews, one of the agents handling the Millbrook case after the FBI got involved. But what caught Marcus's attention more was her tone. Not the tone of an agent who had closed a case, but that of someone standing before an even bigger storm. "We need you." Marcus furrowed his brow. "Another town?" "This time, it's worse than Millbrook." A larger organization than Lynch Matthews described the situation in a small town in South Texas, where the local government was controlled by a sophisticated criminal organization. If Lynch was just a big fish in a small pond, this organization was part of the entire ocean. They don't just control the police, they control the courts, the banks, even the food and healthcare systems. They don't just extort money, they own the town. Marcus pondered, listening carefully to every detail. This wasn't unfamiliar to him. He had seen this kind of system in his overseas missions. Organizations running everything from the shadows, erasing anyone who dared to defy them before they could speak out. "I'm not an FBI agent. I don't have the authority to step into this. But you did something in Millbrook that no one else could, and we need someone like you." Marcus didn't respond immediately. He stood up, gazing out the window. Jordan was still chatting, his face glowing, no longer holding the wariness or fear he once did. Marcus had fought his whole life to protect people like his son, and he knew he wouldn't stop. "Send me everything you have." "I've already sent it." "I knew you'd agree." Marcus hung up, opened his laptop, and instantly a series of documents came through. Photos of missing business people, financial documents showing millions being laundered through fake community programs. Police officers killed for daring to ask questions. Everything had one thing in common. No one dared to speak out. But now Marcus was speaking for them. A goodbye. Unspoken. Jordan walked into the house, seeing his father still focused on the computer screen. He didn't need to ask to know what was happening. He approached, scanning a few lines of documents, then looked at his father. "Are you leaving again?" Marcus turned to his son, his eyes filled with both pride and concern. "There are other towns that need saving, Jordan." Jordan didn't protest. He understood why, but he couldn't help feeling empty at the thought of his father once again stepping into the darkness. He looked directly into Marcus's eyes, no longer a boy who needed protection, but a man facing another warrior. "This time, I want to help." Marcus was slightly surprised, but he quickly understood. Jordan was no longer the child who needed him to protect him. "You can help by keeping Millbrook a good place. But you taught me that justice isn't just in one town." Marcus smiled faintly. "Then help in your own way. Make your voice heard, and if one day you need to fight on the real front lines, make sure you're ready." Jordan nodded, but there was something deeper in his eyes, an understanding that there were battles that couldn't be avoided. He knew that one day he too would step into the fight, just like his father. Marcus's departure. Marcus left the next morning. No farewell, no promise to return. He simply left a letter on the kitchen table, where Jordan would see it as soon as he woke up. He opened the letter, reading each line written in his father's strong and decisive handwriting. "Don't forget what you've learned. Justice doesn't happen on its own, it has to be protected. Do the right thing, even when no one's watching. I'm not gone, I'm just continuing the fight. Keep Millbrook safe." Jordan clenched the letter in his hand, taking a deep breath. Outside, the sun was rising, but the darkness had not yet fully left the world. He knew that his father would do what he always did, hunt down those who needed to pay. And as for him, he would keep fighting in his own way, because this battle never belonged to just one person. Millbrook has been reborn, but the world outside has not changed. In other places, people like Lynch still exist, and other towns remain trapped in the shadows of corruption and crime. Marcus knows this, and that's why he left. But he is not the only one continuing to fight. Jordan has returned to school, but he is no longer the boy he once was. Before, he was just an ordinary high school student, struggling to survive in an unjust system. Now, he is someone who has stood up, fought, and won. But that doesn't mean he's stopping. He continues his studies, but with a clearer goal than ever before. He doesn't just want to live in a fair world, he wants to create it. His speeches are growing more influential. His writings are spreading strongly across social media. Young people in other towns are starting to listen, starting to question, starting to stand up. He receives hundreds of messages every day from people who once thought they had no voice. "I've been harassed by the police for years, but now I know I'm not the only one. How do we start like Millbrook? We want to fight too, show us how." Jordan is no longer just a high school student. He has become a symbol. Not because he's special, but because he dared to do what others were afraid to. Elsewhere, far from Millbrook, Marcus moves through the darkness. No more badges, no more official titles, no one giving him orders, just one mission: to hunt down those who are beyond the reach of the law. He observes from afar, tracks targets, listens to secret conversations, gathers information on a criminal organization even more dangerous than Lynch's. They think they are untouchable, but they are wrong. One of the leaders enters his office, a lavish place with windows overlooking the city. He smiles, lifts his glass, enjoying the life of someone with nothing to fear. But as he sits at his desk, he sees something that makes all the blood in his body run cold. A dagger buried deep into the surface of his desk. The blade, sharp, embedded firmly into the wood. Beside it is a sealed dog tag, an item only one person could own. He swallows, his hand trembling as he picks up the dog tag. Etched on it is a familiar name, a name that has become a nightmare to people like him. Marcus Carter. No threats, no warning letters, only one undeniable truth. He has arrived, and nothing can stop him. In Millbrook, a new morning begins, but this time, the light is no longer hidden by the darkness of fear. Jordan stands in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt, preparing for school. But before stepping out of the room, he looks down at his desk, where the last letter his father left is. He picks it up, reads it again. Do the right thing, even when no one is watching. Jordan clenches the paper, then places it back where it belongs. He knows this battle is endless because out there somewhere, there are still people like the old version of him, living in fear, oppressed, but with no one leading them. He will not let that continue. He couldn't stop his father from walking into the darkness to hunt down the evildoers. But he can do the opposite. Bring light to those who need it. In another town, a group of high school students quietly gathers. A girl opens her laptop. A familiar headline appears. How to Fight Injustice, an article by Jordan Carter. They begin to read, start to plan. The bad guys have controlled their town for too long, but this time they have a way. They have a role model to follow. And with people like Jordan and Marcus, darkness can never win. Millbrook has changed, but the fight against injustice doesn't stop there. Marcus Carter continues his journey in the dark, hunting down those who think they can escape justice. Jordan Carter, once a high school student who was unfairly stopped and detained, is now a beacon of hope for other young people across the country. But this story is not just about them. It's about all of us. In how many other towns, in how many other communities, are there still people oppressed by those with power? How many are waiting for someone to stand up, waiting for their own Jordan Carter? And the question is, will you just watch, or will you be the one who dares to speak out? If this story made you think, don't forget to like, share, so others can see it, and subscribe to the channel to not miss stories about justice, courage, and people who dare to change the world. Because sometimes all it takes to change a corrupt system is one person who dares to say, enough.